Okay, Gary, ready to roll? Today's your favorite topic, coffee. And I got my own little heart study here to kick off the day.
London, it's America, so you need big one.
Isn't this a little bit too much?
Needs give you energy.
You may recall an earlier video I did looking at coffee's link to living longer and expressing my deep love for the caffeine queen. Well, nothing's changed on that front. I still love coffee, but I've switched up my drinking patterns a lot since that time. I'll explain why as we get into the nuts and bolts of this deep dive into the benefits and risks of coffee consumption. On YouTube, videos are everywhere about coffee. Coffee is good for your coffee.
It's in New York, so you need to say coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah.
When in Rome. Videos abound on YouTube with titles like Why I'll Never Drink Coffee Again or the 7 Remarkable Health Benefits of Coffee. So which is it? Is coffee the extender of life or the harbinger of death? Well, the answer is kaleidoscopic, as are all the different factors we're going to look at today. From how caffeine intake correlates to heart health, and brain function, to how coffee rates as a drug of addiction, and the unique effect it may have on children's brains. So strap yourselves in for a deep dive into coffee's risks versus benefits. Welcome to Vital Signs, where we learn how to get healthy from all angles, from the biochemical and nutritional to the things we do that nourish our minds and our souls. I'm Brendan Fallon. And where better to start than the beginning? Before coffee made its grand Western world debut, before caffeine, people used to drink more alcohol. That's because it was easier to get sick from drinking the water at the time. Even children would have hard cider for breakfast. Tea, chocolate, and coffee arrived in England in the 1650s. These new drinks benefited more than just the taste buds, reason being tea and coffee necessitate boiling, thus rendering water safer to drink, which in turn elevated public health at the time. What's more, downing a beverage that boosted rather than subdued mental function, as alcohol does, was linked to greater advancements in human thought at the time. It's even said that the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution were aided by the more sober, clearer thinking and more functional society that these popular drinks ushered in. Coffee houses began popping up all over London as caffeine became widespread in Europe in the 17th century. The great writers and thinkers of the day gathered in such places to discuss literature, poetry, and science. The coffee break is a stirring example of how coffee aided productivity. Legend goes that a necktie company lost its weavers to the war effort during World War II. They hired older men, but these men weren't skilled at weaving, so they hired women. And the women did wonderfully, but only for a handful of hours before they got tired. So company execs put their heads together. What could be done to get more neckties made? The solution? A warm cup of coffee in the middle of the day. Henceforth known as the coffee break, and as legend has it, productivity increased immediately. And this leads us into the effect of drinking coffee, which actually varies across species. For instance, to get your morning buzz, you might hit your local 7-Eleven or your boutique corner cafe if you're putting on the Ritz. But in nature, insects can only rely on the fruits and leaves of coffee and tea plants to get their caffeine fix. And it isn't always a fairy tale ending. Insects can be paralyzed or even killed by the caffeine. You heard right, caffeine is essentially an insecticide. These plants use caffeine to protect themselves from being eaten by insects. That said, the effect of this neurotoxin on humans is slightly different. When humans take caffeine, it stimulates the central nervous system, which gives us a buzz. It dispels drowsiness, enhances attention, raises alertness, and can make thinking more clear and agile. And the reason? It all comes back to how our bodies use energy. If you think back to the high school biology, you'll recall that the energy currents of our bodies is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. It's used for muscle contraction, for transfer of nerve impulses, for chemical synthesis in the body. And when that ATP molecule is broken down, releasing energy, it also releases adenosine. This is where the coffee connection comes in, because adenosine, like caffeine, has a direct connection to how tired or awake we feel. While you're awake, adenosine slowly builds up in the brain. It binds to adenosine receptors, triggering chemical reactions that make you feel tired. The more adenosine in the brain, the more tired you feel. This is why you get more tired the longer you're awake. On the flip side, as you sleep, adenosine levels decline, leading you to hopefully feel ready for action when you wake up. Here's where caffeine enters the stage. Caffeine is incredibly similar to adenosine in structure. Caffeine works its way through your bloodstream and to your brain. Once in the brain, it binds with adenosine receptors, but because it's not adenosine, the tiredness effect isn't felt. If the caffeine is crowding out adenosine, then less adenosine is able to bind, and the proverbial Sandman doesn't come with such urgency. Which is all well and good. You're feeling weary, but you got a job to do. Why not crowd out some of that adenosine with caffeine? Well, we've all done that, and it may well seem to get us over the hump of the day. One thing it's important to keep in mind, though, there's a good reason that we feel tired. Research suggests adenosine is there to protect the brain against energy depletion, to force sleep before the energy balance of the whole brain is affected. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Daniel Amen, a psychiatrist who uses specialized imaging to show patients how different substances like marijuana, like caffeine, impact their brains and thus their mental health. This is what he said about caffeine canceling out adenosine.
The problem is adenosine is still going up, but it blocks the effect of it, and you end up with a rebound the next day. And that's why people start their days with caffeine, because what they're really doing is medicating sleep deprivation. And I would just argue if you get rid of caffeine, your sleep's going to be better, your energy is going to be better. It's a short-term fix that continues to cause a long-term problem.
And yet, as with so many things, there is a flip side to this. Due to caffeine's effects on certain adenosine receptors, like the A1 adenosine receptor, caffeine has long been proposed to treat memory disorders. You see, caffeine's cognitive effects, like alertness, are mostly due to its ability to affect A1 adenosine receptors in the hippocampus and cortex, which are brain areas mostly involved in cognition. One study used the drug scopolamine, also known as devil's breath, and which has a long history of criminal abuses. Researchers used scopolamine to induce memory loss in rats, and then they used an A1 adenosine receptor blocker, which is what caffeine is, to reverse the memory loss in the rats. With effects like these, it's no surprise that coffee is linked to a lower risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. A 2009 study analyzed 20 years of follow-up data on 1,400 participants. Those who drank 3 to 5 cups of coffee daily had a 65% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared to non-coffee drinkers. In another study, mice were given caffeine in their drinking water from young adulthood into older age. These mice displayed protection against memory impairment. They also showed lower brain levels of the abnormal protein amyloid beta, or A-beta, which is believed to contribute to Alzheimer's disease. After only 2 months of caffeine therapy, the older, cognitively impaired mice exhibited memory restoration and lower brain A-beta levels. And if coffee has scope to help ward off dementia, it's not such a stretch to imagine it also has antidepressant properties. A study by the Harvard School of Public Health in 2011 analyzed data from 50,000 women. The study found that women who drank 2 to 3 cups of coffee per day had a 15% lower risk of developing depression compared to non-coffee drinkers. Women who drank 4 cups had a 20% lower risk. 2 years later, in another study, they showed drinking 2 to 4 cups of coffee per day was linked to a lower suicide rate than that found in the general population. Now, why would coffee potentially influence mental health? Again, it has to do with those receptors for adenosine, and one in particular called A2A, known to have interactions with receptors for dopamine, the feel-good hormone. Research shows mice injected with A2A adenosine receptor blockers were less sensitive to depressant challenges than mice who were not given the blockers. As such, it's thought that blocking A2A adenosine receptors, which is basically what caffeine does, it's thought that blocking these receptors could be a target for future antidepressant drugs. However, as you sit there sipping your skinny double frappuccino latte, basking in the glow of caffeine's potential memory-preserving and mood-enhancing effects, there is a concomitant dark side to caffeine's medicinal promise. And it also ties into interactions with the body's dopamine, aka feel-good system. I refer, of course, to caffeine's addiction and habit-forming potential. As it happens, cocaine also acts on the body's dopaminergic system. It's presumed that cocaine works by blocking dopamine uptake, thus prolonging how long dopamine remains in the extracellular space. It's suggested caffeine could have a similar, albeit less potent effect. This is one reason why we might find caffeine addictive. Of course, we can't exactly equate caffeine with drugs of addiction like cocaine or heroin. However, how do you fare when you miss your morning caffeination? Extreme fatigue and headaches are common for those skipping their daily caffeine fix. And the reason? Well, these are your basic symptoms of withdrawal. And remember the chemical adenosine that we discussed earlier. The more adenosine you have in the brain, the more tired you feel. While caffeine can help block the effects of adenosine in the brain, with long-term use of caffeine, your brain responds by creating more adenosine receptors. This essentially builds up an immunity to caffeine. Over time, more caffeine is required to make you feel awake. This immunity creates a dependence for more and more coffee, causing withdrawals when you try to quit. I asked Dr. Amen if he'd had caffeine addiction encounters in his practice. This is the story that he relayed.
One of my favorite stories is an Air Force pilot who came to see me, and his brain looked way older than he did. And he wasn't using marijuana, but he was addicted to caffeine. He'd have anywhere from 6 to 12 cups a day. And he's like, but I can't live without it. And I'm like, no, that's a lie. You can live without it. I said, and if you want to just stop, well, you probably feel bad for 5 or 6 days. The other option is just go down by 10% a day. And he chose that, didn't have any withdrawal symptoms. A month later, he was stunned with the amount of energy he had, with how much better his sleep was. And it's the little lies we tell ourselves, I often say, that keep us fat, depressed, and feeble-minded. I need this. And the fact is, the brain is lazy. The brain does what you allow it to do. And good habits take just as much energy as bad habits. Now, you have to sort of reshape your brain. That takes a bit of energy, but there's no way he's going back to caffeine.
Afterwards, see that full interview with Dr. Amen looking at how marijuana, caffeine, and other substances we might loosely dub harmless actually affect the brain. Find the link at the top of the comments and also in the description below. Also, I invite you to share this video with at least one friend or family member. It helps bring subscribers to the channel, which makes my boss happy and supports me to do more and more shows. And it all starts with that share arrow just below. So this brings me to the point I alluded to in the beginning on why I've personally slashed my caffeine intake. When I feel good, when I feel clear, when my brain is running like a well-oiled machine, I want to know that that's coming organically from me, from the B vitamins made by my gut, for example, from the dopamine and endorphins released in my brain. These are influenced by what I eat, things I engage in like exercise and meditation, and of course, doing my job, which I love, no doubt gives me a dopamine kick. Suffice to say, I get an organic chemical benefit for eating and doing certain things. But it's not like I'm chasing a chemical high. Whereas with coffee, I think often subconsciously we're chasing the caffeine kick. And when I hear people say, I can't start my day without coffee, or don't try to talk to me until I've had my coffee.
Don't talk to me till I've had coffee.
All right, let me just...
What did I say?
Well, to me, that suggests you've subordinated your own resources for peace of mind to something external, aka the dark roasted enchantress. Don't get me wrong, I still love coffee, maybe a little too much, so I've slashed my intake. So now that we've explored that dark side, let's celebrate some of coffee's resounding benefits. But first, I'd love to hear where you stand on coffee. Are you reaping endless benefits? Or have you found a dark side to your dark roast blend? You can go to epochtv.com and find Vital Signs in the Talk Shows tab to leave your comments. Now let's cut straight to the chase. I know you've heard the rumors, the suggestions that drinking coffee can extend life. Naturally, there's no definitive answer to this, but there is a rather intriguing study that came through from Southern Medical University in China. They looked at 170,000 people of Britain over a span of 7 years. The study used UK population bank data and was credible enough to be published in the Annals of Internal Medicine. The study began with tracking people who were without known heart disease and cancer. Over the 7-year span, they compared coffee drinkers and non-coffee drinkers. Of the coffee drinkers, they compared those with sugar and those without. They even looked at those who artificially sweeten with things like sucralose, saccharin, or xylitol. What they found was that drinking 1.5 to 3.5 cups of unsweetened coffee a day tied into a 16 to 29% reduced risk of death by any cause. Now, if you're downing 1.5 to 3.5 medium-sized cups a day and you're adding in a spoonful of sweetness, the odds of dying early was reduced by 28 to 31%. That's lower risk of death than taking coffee with no sugar, apparently. As for drinking coffee with artificial sweetener, the researchers didn't see a clear connection to longer lifespan coming through. Why, you might wonder? Well, if coffee's good stuff like antioxidants and electrolytes really do extend lifespan, then maybe the artificial sweetener counteracts this benefit. All in all, though, keep in mind association, as they say, doesn't equal cause. Just because coffee drinking ties into lower mortality doesn't mean that it's causing it. There could be other factors at play extending people's lives, like their socioeconomic status, for one. After all, if you're financially able to burn cash on that specially produced $600 a pound civet coffee, or if your coffee drinking habit stems from a busy job with high income, maybe you have a better quality of life in general, and maybe that's what's sending your all-cause mortality down to the basement. So that's longevity. But of course, we would be remiss in discussing longer life if not to consider heart health. As it happens, coffee consumption is linked to lower risk of arrhythmia. Arrhythmia is, of course, where your heart rhythm isn't normal. It might be too fast when you're at rest, or it may just have an irregular beating pattern. Arrhythmias can be serious, and they can also be harmless. A 2020 study looked at data from over 350,000 participants from the UK Biobank over more than 5 years. They found drinking coffee linked to a significant lower risk of developing heart rhythm abnormalities. Drinking 1 to 2 cups aligned to a 10% reduced risk of arrhythmias, 3 to 4 cups of 14% lower risk, and 5 or more cups to 15% lower. So that's coffee drinking and arrhythmias. Now let's consider coffee's role in helping weight loss and metabolic health. A 2013 study looked at the link between coffee consumption and the markers of metabolic syndrome. It found those who drank 1 to 4 cups of coffee daily had less visceral fat compared to those who didn't drink coffee or those who consumed more coffee. Research shows that coffee can increase fat burning and metabolism, and as a result, help with weight loss. A study published in the Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism showed caffeine boosted metabolism by an average of 7% within 3 hours of consumption. Coffee also contains a nutrient called chlorogenic acid, which has been found to promote the breakdown of body fat while potentially protecting muscle tissue, a light of hope for all of those looking to drop body fat while preserving muscle. The combo of caffeine and chlorogenic acid is particularly special. Why does chlorogenic acid protect muscle? It activates AMPK, a special protein in our body that's also activated during intermittent fasting. This improves the transport of glucose to brain cells. By doing so, it helps regulate inflammation levels in the body. It also enhances autophagy, the process of clearing metabolic waste from cells. This is beneficial for preserving valuable muscle tissue. Additionally, caffeine affects the sympathetic nervous system, increasing excitement and willingness to move, thereby accelerating metabolism and increasing energy expenditure. In addition to weight loss, research signals another coffee benefit. Many studies link drinking coffee daily to lower type 2 diabetes risk. One study found drinking as little as 2 cups per day linked to lower incidence of type 2 diabetes in younger and middle-aged women. Then there's a review in the Archives of Internal Medicine of 18 studies finding coffee, decaffeinated coffee, and tea all associated with lower type 2 diabetes risk. Chlorogenic acid is one of the main antioxidants found in coffee. This ingredient may lower absorption of glucose from sugary or high carbohydrate foods. As a result, it may slow the release of sugar into the bloodstream after a meal. This could help prevent insulin resistance and may be key to why drinking coffee is linked to lower type 2 diabetes risk. Now, with that said, you won't necessarily see an immediate lowering of blood sugar from drinking coffee. In fact, your blood sugar may actually elevate. This is because caffeine is a stimulant that can trigger adrenaline or epinephrine release and thus a temporary rise in blood sugar. For some, especially those with diabetes, caffeine may slow bodily response to insulin, so blood sugar levels would rise in the short term. Then, of course, if you're adding sugar to your coffee, that's liable to significantly elevate your blood sugar and potentially offset any diabetes-improving benefit drinking coffee may offer. So for sure, caffeine has its associations with good health. But before you start chugging down your premium blend of Ethiopian medium to light roast by the gallon, let me flip the script on you again with some more caffeine risk factors. For instance, you may not need an ID to get it, but coffee is truly an adult-only beverage. Research signals the negative impact of caffeine on the brain development of children and adolescents. One study showed caffeine correlating negatively to 7 key cognitive measures. Adjustments were made for age, gender, sleep, socioeconomic status. Even so, caffeine intake still had negative associations to most cognitive functions, including vocabulary, comprehension, memory, cognitive flexibility, and processing speed. Even more concerning, caffeine is found in many sodas, energy drinks, and teas that younger people enjoy. So it's good to be aware of the caffeine content in beverages and how much you or your child are ingesting every day. Then there's the pesticide factor. Not all coffee is equal on this front. Depending on growing and harvesting methods, some coffee may contain high amounts of pesticides. Pesticides are linked to serious health issues like cancer. So when it comes to coffee, buying organic, although it may stretch the budget, is likely the safer bet. How about nutrient depletion? Regarding coffee, one size does not fit all. Different people may be impacted more negatively than others. Coffee is a stimulant, so it can raise blood pressure and heart rates. For these reasons, the American Pregnancy Association recommends limiting caffeine intake during pregnancy. And lastly, because coffee is a diuretic, it's associated with calcium excretion and interferes with iron absorption. Those who need more iron or are at risk of low iron, such as pregnant or menstruating women, or the elderly population, should exercise caution when it comes to caffeine. Increasing vital nutrients like calcium may also help offset any negative effects of caffeine. And so, there we have it. Drinking coffee is linked to an array of positives, including living longer, better mental health, better heart health. It may even aid memory. Keep in mind, though, that association does not equal cause. There could be other factors like people's wealth contributing to these health benefits. As well, coffee has risk factors. Caffeine isn't cocaine, it isn't heroin, but it can be addictive. And if you can't survive your morning without your magic beans, and it takes more magic beans to get you through than it used to, then it may be time to consider other ways to even your keel, like better diet, exercise, meditation, to name but a few. You can subscribe to access these and other news and health insights by clicking the big red button. It's been great to be with you. I'm Brendan Fallon, and this is Vital Signs.